Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this Geneva International Association Forum webinar on unlocking the potential of partnerships and alliances and how they can help you deliver on your association's mission. I'm Tommy Goodwin, Vice President with the Exhibitions and Conferences Alliance, and I have the honor of moderating this session on such an important topic to all of us in the global association community. And I thank you all very much for being here today.
Sorry.
As we get started, I also want to extend my profound thanks to all of the wonderful partners of GIAF for their support for today's event. We have the Barcelona Convention Bureau, which is GIAF's global destination partner. We have Singapore Exhibition and Convention Bureau, which is GIAF's Asia destination partner. The Geneva Convention Bureau, the GIAF destination partner. The Intercontinental Geneva, which is GIAF's hospitality partner. And Congrex Switzerland, which is GIAF's event partner. So we thank all of them for their ongoing support of GIAF and bringing this wonderful community together. Now, today's conversation is the fifth in a series of webinars leading up to the Geneva International Association Forum, which is scheduled for September 16 and 17, so please save the date for that. And with that, I'm going to turn to Anne Seberg for any housekeeping and technical items before we begin. Anne?
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I had a few computer issues, but they seem to be resolved now. I am your virtual host for the day, so we're looking forward to welcome you here onto this webinar. All we wanted to do was just say hi and make sure everyone's connected. Let me know in the chat if you have any questions, and make sure to introduce you in the chat for if you want to say hi to anyone you know. Otherwise, we just look forward to introducing you to our great speakers, and Tommy will go on and explaining a little bit more about how we're going to do the questions, because we would obviously love to hear from you as well.
And thank you very much. And with that, let's go ahead and begin our conversation today on the importance of partnerships. And to do that, it's my honor to introduce our three wonderful panelists to all of you. We have with us today David Bridgeman, who is the head of operations and logistics with Swift and Sibos, which I think everyone knows is the world's premier financial services event. We have Colm Clarke, a partner with Exempla Management and Consulting, which is an organization that helps associations and event organizers achieve sustainable success. And last but certainly not least, we have Judy Stenmark, who is the Director General of the Global Self-Care Federation, which is an association of manufacturers and distributors of non-prescription medicines. So we thank all of them for being here with us today. And as we begin the conversation, as Anne mentioned, we very much invite you all to engage with us as the conversation unfolds. We very much welcome your questions. As we go along today, there is a Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen, and please enter any questions you have for our wonderful panelists there. And we will get to those as the conversation carries along and again at the end today. So we appreciate those in advance. And so let's go ahead and begin the conversation. And let me turn to Colm for a moment. Colm, when you think about the topic at hand today and partnerships and alliances, what does that mean to you? How do we think about collaborations, whether they're partnerships, alliances, or maybe even something else in the association community? How do you think about those?
Well, at the beginning of this conversation and the discussion today, I would just really like to encourage everyone to keep an open mind as to what those things might mean, because I think words like partnership and alliance, I think they in the association context, they may well anchor people's thinking into one thing or another thing. So I would kind of encourage everyone to start more focus on the word you used, which was collaboration. Because collaboration can be in many, many forms of many purposes, all different types of scale and depth. It can be associations getting together to push out a joint message. It can be working together on strategic positioning. It can also be all manner of commercial arrangements, and those can be in both directions. So partnerships from people or with people that you buy things from, but also partnerships with people that you sell things to. So there's lots and lots of things that fit into this discussion. And the bigger we think, the more ideas we can generate. So, I also think that associations are very used to getting things done with very limited resources. And we all know there are very good reasons for that. But that shouldn't restrict our thinking when we're talking about this topic. So my kind of initial thing would really be to, don't think about partnerships or collaborations or whatever they might be, don't think about those as things you do when we really can't do it ourselves. Just think about, more in the mindset of, well, we want to do this. Could it be better if we did it with somebody else? Or would it be better if we had a different type of resource or a different type of expertise in the mix? So really keeping it open and really looking at it in a positive sense.
Tremendous advice as we begin. Thank you for that. David, I want to bring you in now. How do you and Swift look at partnerships and alliances, and what type of partnerships or alliances, or as Colm mentions, collaboration opportunities do you actively seek out in your work?
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. And I hope you can all hear me okay. There's a bit of a storm passing overhead here at home in my attic, so I'm getting a lot of feedback in the background, but I'll crack on anyway. So I think just speaking a little bit around Swift, and Swift is part of the financial community. Broadly speaking, we are the rails that enable the banks and financial institutions to send money around the world. I think not to worry, I'm not going to go into the world of finance today, but what I would like to do instead is give you an insight into the Swift world of events and talk a little bit about how we create, manage, and collaborate to ensure successful partnerships across the globe. And I think the best way I can probably do that today and demonstrate it today is to talk about our flagship event, Sibos, throughout the course of this session. So a little bit on Sibos, again, just for those who may not be aware. Sibos is a yearly event, and it currently rotates from Europe to the Americas to Asia on a 3-year cycle. And it brings together the top senior decision makers within the financial industry, bringing together banks, financial institutions, corporates, and fintechs. And ultimately, the USP of Sibos is that it brings together all of these decision makers in one place, under one roof, those budget holders to network and share industry dialogue. And ultimately, you have the opportunity to be incredibly productive over those 4 days. So that's a tiny bit about Swift, a little bit about Sibos. But before we can make it to those 4 days of what some call world-class networking, we have to look behind the big machine that is Sibos. And we have to understand that the success of the event is driven by successful partnerships. From the suppliers we use to help us move around the world, logistically, creatively, and cost effectively. By the way, we call our suppliers partners. From the convention bureaus that we collaborate with, and that we collaborate years in advance to build our partnership as we move to their host city for Sibos. Of course, our partnerships here allow us to plug into the city and avail of all the fantastic opportunities in a host city. And of course, we look at the venue, which is the jewel in the crown, some might say, which is where most of the event magic happens. It's no understatement to say that on the Sibos and Swift side, we partner through the partnerships really is what truly safeguards the success of our event.
Oh, that's tremendous. I think we'll go into that a little bit more later, hopefully. Judy, I'd love to add you to the conversation right now. Yeah, I know your association recently did some strategizing around partnerships and how to better work with stakeholders more broadly. Can you talk a little bit about that as we begin?
Yeah, sure, Tommy, and hello, everyone. So we've just now finalized our new 3-year strategy for the next 3 years, but in the lead up to that in 2020, we embarked on a global trust survey to look at really what are the drivers of trust and what are the barriers of trust in our industry, which is consumer healthcare. And we surveyed consumers and patients, stakeholders from healthcare professionals, policymakers, governments, other organizations. And one of the main things that came out of the recommendation and the action plan after this big piece of work was, what's the first thing we should do is really try and enhance and drive our stakeholder engagement to really build trust. So that came out as number one in terms of what we should do. And the other thing was, of course, transparency and being more transparent or being transparent where we can with everything we do. And we're a small trade association, and so we cannot do it all alone. And so we've never had a stakeholder engagement strategy before. Now we do. We have a very good one, and we're ticking off all the boxes. But I think just echoing something that Colm said is that think of these partnerships and alliances or stakeholder engagement, whatever you want to call them, as opportunities, and not, oh, well, we should do this, we should join with that group. It's always think of it as the opportunity and what can you get out of it, but what can you bring to it as well.
That's tremendous. This is a great start. And as we carry on the conversation, I want to again invite everyone to submit some questions for the panel in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. But as we wait for some of those questions to come in, let me pivot the conversation just a little bit, because oftentimes I think when we talk about partnerships and alliances, we sort of speak in very, very broad generalities. And I would love to have a little bit more of a granular conversation with a little bit more specifics. And David, you teed up some very, very interesting ideas a few moments ago in terms of, you know, forming partnerships and what you're looking for. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you look to form partnerships? And, you know, you talk about the event cycle. When in the conceptualization and delivery process does that begin? And as the process unfolds from your perspective, what makes those partnerships truly successful?
Thanks, Tommy. Yeah, for us, it starts a long time before we have a partner or a partnership in sight. We run a lot of RFPs on Swift and on Sibos. We run RFPs for our partner network. We run RFPs to choose the venue and destinations for Sibos. And ultimately, by going through these RFP process, it allows us to already ensure longer term partnerships are established at that stage. Our RFP process, it's really not a flash in the pan scenario. They generally can take longer than a year. And we spend a lot of time from the outset explaining to the potential bidders what the undertaking is, so that there's no misconception of the journey they're about to take. Once they're in and the bidders are on board, we not only invite every bidder to attend Sibos to truly understand what they're undertaking, we spend time with the bidders through every facet of the event, through registration, through the exhibition, through the conference sessions, through the networking, even through the catering, so that they are really onboarded in all aspects of the event. They spend time meeting with all of the key people at the event to make sure, as part of our onboarding program, and they get to understand the challenges that Sibos generally may have year on year as it moves around the world. But maybe more importantly, they get to understand the level of service required, and they are left in no doubt as to what Sibos needs in order to make it a success going forward. What I can say is that once a bidding city or a bidding supplier or partner, as we call them, goes through that experience, I think they're very enthusiastic to move forward into a longer term partnership at that stage. Once our RFP process does ensure that when the Sibos preparation begins, we really are off to a good start, and we are off to a positive start once the bidder is chosen and we move to that production stage. I think on top of that, in terms of the developing the partnership even further, we also, from a collaborative and team building point of view, we also use our familiarization trips to the host city, where we can start to collaborate, create partnerships, which enables all of the different entities to understand complementary capabilities, to really align on that common goal, and ultimately ensure that the event can be successful. So circling back around right to the start, Tommy, what makes partnerships successful? I guess it takes a lot of time. So you need to spend a lot of time to make sure you choose the right partners and put some time into it. And I do believe, and I have the case studies to prove it, that what you put in, you do get out in terms of these partnerships.
That's great examples. Thank you. Judy, let me turn back to you. You mentioned your organization's new stakeholder engagement plan and sort of the importance of partnerships, alliances, and collaborations in that going forward. Are there some partnerships or alliances that have worked particularly well for your organization over time? And given your sort of new focus there, are there some successes and learnings and takeaways from partnerships like those that are going to inform how you're looking at the new partnerships you'll pursue as part of this new strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. Yeah, so I've only been at the Federation for 2 years, but the Federation has been going since about 1979, so for a long time. And I'm going to use the example of FIP, which is the International Federation of Pharmacists, as an example. So we had a long standing relationship with FIP, and I guess you could say it was sort of just ambling along and a bit tired, doing the same old stuff that often health-related medical NGOs do, like joint sessions at each other's meetings, joint statements, that sort of thing. So it was all kind of okay, if you like. And then in 2019, we decided, okay, well, let's just really, even before we did our new strategy, let's review what we're doing here and really delve into what you want to achieve, the other group, and what we want to achieve, and not just do the same old thing. And how can we be innovative and be a bit creative, not just for the sake of it, but to really try and take it to a new level. So that's what we did after a lot of meetings and sessions, etc. And then also last year, COVID, and then health going digital and telehealth, etc., really brought this relationship together, because for us, pharmacists are one of the key healthcare professionals in terms of self-care. And then, of course, the pandemic really shone a spotlight on that, and also on self-care and on digital health. So in fact, COVID kind of brought that all together. And I think what has made it now, not previously, but now a really successful relationship, is that first of all, we have common goals. So we reiterated what are those common goals, and a real willingness to work together, and then bringing in some outside people as well to kind of bring in some new thinking and new blood in terms of how can the pharmacists and the Self-Care Federation really take it to a new level. So I think they were some of the success factors, not just talking and preaching to the same crew.
Oh, thank you, Judy. Colm, we've got two great perspectives there. From those case studies and examples and perspectives, as well as your own experience, what are some of the best practices and considerations that you think are essential to helping associations truly unlock the power of their collaborations, partnerships, and alliances? And I'd be curious from your perspective, are there unique roles here for board and staff and some of the other stakeholders?
Yeah, let me maybe latch on to that, the last point you made there, Tony, about the roles of the board and staff, because I think that's a really interesting dynamic to dig into a bit. I think it's very important that people play different roles, and also that those roles might vary according to the situation. So, for example, we've seen situations where kind of the volunteer leadership might cut through the concerns staff had about the time and energy or the resources invested into a certain partnership, because they were looking at it kind of from a resource plan or from a business ROI perspective. But the volunteers could really cut through that and say, listen, this is on the member's mind, or this is what the sector is feeling. We have to do this because this is more of a morale boosting thing, or this is a moral obligation we have to act or come together. So they kind of cut through the staff concerns. And then in the other way around, you have times where the staff plays a very important role in kind of reality checking something that may have been generated as a very nice idea between a group or leaders of respective organizations. But of course, they hadn't necessarily looked at the business models behind it or the operational complexity to do what they were thinking about. And then the staff role is to give the reality check. So, I think these roles shift, but they're all extremely valuable. Something else that, if I think back to one session in particular we did with a client, the most important part of that discussion came down to looking at unintended consequences of the partnerships that they were considering. So you want to look at things, how might the thing that you're doing be perceived, not from your view because you know why and you're doing all the right things, but why did you choose maybe this partner or those partners but not other ones, and what will people think about if they come into it from that mindset? If it's a commercial decision or there's a contract with financials attached to it, how was that partnership started? Was it an open process? Was it clear and transparent? Did you follow your own procurement processes, etc.? Those type of things. So I think those are some of the things that you need to always consider. And for me, as a general best practice, what I like to see is that the volunteers and staff are comfortable in playing these roles. I don't want to say not confrontational for the sake of being confrontational, but really being checks and balances on each other's viewpoints, and that's really to make sure you get the best outcome, not to make a meaningless compromise, but to make sure you get the best outcome and balance, and in a way that you don't forget some things that you should have considered in the development stage. And the last thing I want to mention as well is kind of to pick up on something that David gave a great example of, and that's on where there are commercial agreements in place and contracting. I also really believe in spending the time up front, and that people are really transparent on their assumptions and their expectations, because that's how you get a good win-win contract, and that's what a partnership contract should be. If I look at our own business, where we have contracts with clients where we have a stake in the outcome, for me, the measure of a good contract is that basically you never need to look at it again once the project is underway. Because if you find yourself having to second guess what you're doing, or people aren't sure who should be getting what or how much effort should be going in, that's a sign straight away that something isn't clear on the expectations. And you've got to address that, because if you don't address misaligned expectations or assumptions, you're just storing up trouble down the road. So I think that upfront investment, it does take time, but if you want to have a win-win situation, it's absolutely worth it. So a couple of things from my perspective.
That's some great advice. If you find yourself going to the contract, you're in trouble. So this is sage advice from Colm. Judy, in your comments, you mentioned how you're looking at things sort of, and how COVID-19 has colored how you're thinking about partnerships. And I think there's probably, I'd like to deviate off there for just a moment. You've kind of given us your broader vision of how the Federation is thinking about partnerships and alliances going forward. How has COVID-19 changed that, and how is the pandemic evolving how you're thinking about partnerships in this sort of digital first environment that we're in today?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tommy. So as I said, COVID has really shone a spotlight on self-care, and in many ways it's been beneficial for us on that level, because it's made people realize, and policymakers, etc., that okay, self-care is important, but it's also really shone a spotlight on digital health, telehealth, telemedicine, and that intertwined has really made us think about various things. We have a health data initiative, which has been very important, but now what we're looking at is health literacy and digital health literacy. So for a health-related NGO, this is now critically important. And I mean, health literacy and enhancing it is always important, but now it's digital health literacy. And what should we be doing about that? Should we be taking a stance on that? How can we effectively contribute to the conversation? So I guess in terms of digital first environment, that's one of the things that the pandemic has really shown us, and that we have to be part of the conversation and not wait and see what everyone else does. And so I guess we're doing that in terms of digital health and health data, but also the environment and how digital and regulatory responses shape that as well. And that's also come out a little bit of with COVID as well.
Oh, very, very interesting. David, let me ask you a somewhat similar question. You know, coming at this from the business event space, what should associations be doing today to position themselves for partnerships and alliances in this more digital first and hybrid world we're living in?
Yeah, I think we all need to take a step back and consider what the new normal is going to look like for our companies H2 of 2021 into 22 and beyond. I think with the pandemic, there's been a devastating impact on the events industry, for example, which is an industry that most associations are working incredibly close with. You know, not to sound insensitive, but I think as a first step, I think it would be important to maybe consider to look at your existing partnerships to safeguard those existing partnerships before positioning for potentially new partnerships in the future, if I can give that as an example. So it's really looking a little bit closer to home. And if some of your existing partnerships are being impacted by the pandemic, maybe it's an opportunity to show some support, you know, depending on how that partnership started out and that you had that clear common goal and trust and everything else. And provided that's all in place, maybe there is an opportunity to help someone out in this landscape. I think secondly, I think, you know, most event organizers, you know, most associations, maybe we haven't really, Judy kind of touched on it, we haven't really had a choice. We've had to pivot to digital. And if we're honest, we don't really know how long we're going to live in this space. And, you know, depending on how the vaccine rollout goes and how quickly we can reach herd immunity, you know, I think we are all hoping that we can get back to the levels of in-person event pre-pandemic ASAP. I think they're two very different scales. And I think the truth is probably somewhere in between. A little bit. I think the format of physical, digital, and in some cases, hybrid events, they're likely to make many organizational programs now moving forward, as I said, into H2 of this year. And certainly we're going to see a fusion of those formats moving forward on event programs as we look ahead. So I think digital certainly has a place in this new normal. I mean, I think if I look a year and a half ago back, we only need to look to today. Kai, Anne, Tommy, and yourself have brought me, Colm, and Judy here on this call for this session. There's been no flights, no accommodation, and yet we're giving some, what I hope will be some good thought leadership to those listeners among us. I think the only thing that's missing is the pre and post-event session networking and possibly some social activities thereafter. But with that in mind, I do think it has a place in programs moving forward, certainly. I think in terms of partnerships, I think it's important to explore how we're going to live in this new normal, this new digital world. And on the digital side, I think a lot of us have to start thinking about our digital platform, you know, how audience engagement is going to work, how networking is going to work from that point of view as well. But then looking further down the line, I think your value proposition is potentially impacted as well in this new phygital world, in this new blended world, if I can call it that. So definitely, I think there are some considerations around offering digital versus physical. And I think looking ahead, you have to imagine that those attendees who used to come in person to your event, now that there is a digital option, I think there's going to be an expectation on us all to, when we do get back to in person, to really make sure that those who do invest to come in person, that there is real value for money for their investment, because I think their time is going to be that much more precious to them looking ahead. So overall, I think there are many considerations, but also many opportunities to consider in this new normal.
David, that's great. And let me ask a very quick follow-up question. I think your thoughts spurred a question here, and Alice from Destination Toronto ask, with this growth of hybrid and hybrid sort of being here to stay, have you all thought about what the size of a live event like Sibos is going to look like going forward with that integration of the hybrid audience? Are you expecting the attendance to look like it has previously? Are you expecting some variation there? And how's that sort of playing into your thinking at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. And hello to my friends at Tourism Toronto and beyond, where Sibos has a very successful track record, I'd like to add. It's very difficult to say, isn't it? I think Sibos did its first fully digital event last year in what was due to be in Boston, but like a lot of events, we pivoted to digital. And our last physical event was in London in 2019, where we welcomed over 11,000 people physically at the event. Fast forward to Boston and to 2020, and when we pivoted to digital, we welcomed over 22,000 to the digital aspect of the event. And so quite a high percentage of those attendees digitally were a brand new audience. So we now have to consider, well, the style of Sibos, as I alluded to earlier. So I think when we do get back to in-person, it won't be just, certainly not in the short term, it won't be just in person, but it will resonate as a hybrid event to consider that new audience as well. To answer the question about numbers coming back, we're hoping to be back in person next year in Amsterdam. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball, and with these new variants going around as well, it's never clear. We thought last year that we would be in a position to do in person this year, and that unfortunately has turned out not to be the case. But looking ahead to next year, I think a lot depends on vaccination rollouts. I think there's a big emphasis on corporate travel policies as well, and how they will look, and if companies will feel safe to let their staff start to travel again. It's likely to start domestically initially and potentially move to regional, and with maybe the bigger international events to then start to bring more people in person. If we look at the timeline today for Sibos next year, in 22 and maybe beyond, yes, I would hope that we can get back to very strong levels in those future years. I think a lot of I would like to add, I think why I'm not mentioning a figure, but why I'm confident that we will be back strong is that there is a lot of data outside of the events industry suggesting that people are incredibly hungry to come back to events. So that's not just obviously people who are keen to get back for obvious reasons, but beyond that, there is a lot of anticipation to get back to physical events. So I'm very hopeful and positive about in-person coming back even stronger than they were. And then that leaves it to us, to Judy, to others to raise the bar in terms of networking and how we make sure that our attendees can spend their time more effectively.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Alice, thank you for the question. We've also got some great questions from Therese and James that we're going to come to a little bit later. So keep the questions and comments coming in. We very much appreciate them. Colm, back to you. Thoughts around sort of the changing nature of partnerships and alliances and collaborations in this digital world? Do we need to think more expansively? What do we need to do differently in recognition of this environment that David just so well articulated?
Yeah, I think the couple of key things change here, and things can happen a lot faster. And like David mentioned, they can happen a lot easier. A lot of things that were tied up or tied to physical events before were just ruled out because they were either too costly or you couldn't match the business models. Let's do something together, but the other organization's members won't travel to your event for that little bit of it, or to bring in speakers was too complex, etc. So I see a lot of opportunity, especially where things are around content or knowledge sharing, but also a lot of opportunity to do high value collaborations that aren't necessary, that are actually quite niche. So not necessarily trying to do, kind of big and broad things together, but also doing things that are maybe targeted at a portion of members where there's an overlap, or where their employers or where their companies may see value in different parts of related professions, for example, getting together, or related sectors getting together. And those type of things can happen, I think, much more easily online, because you don't necessarily have that upfront cost investment to put it together. And it's also a bit, I think, the mindset of how people consume content now. It's no longer, I think, again, when we look at the physical event, often there's this kind of need to appeal to at least a broad enough community that enough people will come to pay for the thing to take place. Whereas now, free from those cost constraints, you're more free to do things that are, like I said, niche. So you don't need to be thinking about that, the family entertainment show at 8 p.m. on a Saturday night that has to have something from everyone, from the 7-year-old just about to go to bed up to grandmother, because we're all going to be watching it. Now you can really do things. It's like, okay, this is maybe going to appeal to 50 people or 100 people, but this is going to be really valuable. So in a way, the very high value multiplied by a smaller audience on balance may outweigh, a low value, but that's very generally applicable. So I see that's where we really see a lot of opportunities in the space for these kind of quick collaborations, quick type of sharing. Throws up a whole load of other questions, by the way, in terms of where the value proposition lies and who gets the value and who owns the IP. But those are for another, in a way, those are for another portion of the conversation. But the opportunities, I think, are certainly there.
I think you bring up some great points there. Thank you. And I'm gonna stick with you for just a moment, because I want to ask a follow-up question on this. You talk about some of the other questions that these new types of partnerships bring up. And I think it was mentioned earlier that oftentimes when we're thinking about partnerships, we're thinking about sort of opportunities. We're thinking about shoring up some weaknesses that our organizations may not be able to deliver on themselves. But I've had conversations with folks, and one of the things that's kind of come to the fore is when associations oftentimes look at partnerships, sometimes they're focused on the opportunity, they're focused on where they can go with the partnership. Sometimes they devalue what they bring to the table, right? Every organization's got a unique set of assets and capabilities that they bring to the table. And it almost feels like sometimes that when looking for that opportunity, they forget about what they're bringing to that table, that two-way exchange that you were talking about. And since partnerships and alliances are ultimately two-way streets, Colm, how do you think associations should approach these tie-ups, these collaborations in a way that they do both sides derive value from them, and you don't have one side necessarily giving away the farm to just engage in this either short-term or long-term collaboration?
This is a really tricky question, to be honest, but I like tricky questions. They're the fun ones, right? Because I think in this space, it pays to kind of be counterintuitive. Because we all want to talk about having clear ROI and having and I said it just earlier, having clear expectations and assumptions. But in some areas, that can lead us down the wrong path, right? Because it's really easy to put a euro or dollar value on some things, like advertising or your exhibit booth or things like that. And it's really, really hard to put a financial value on a lot of other things. So, at the moment, everyone's talking about, how we should be so data driven. And, that's great. And I do believe that, but I believe that in areas where you have really reliable measurements and you can make coherent comparisons. But the reality for associations is that, we operate in a lot of different areas where it's really hard to make, hard and fast objective measurements or quantify the value of things. There's content that people bring to the table, expert content. There's things like influence. You bring contacts. How good are the quality of those contacts? What is the data that you bring in to the conversation? These are things that it's really, really hard to put a hard and fast value on. So, we work for organizations, for example, where if a commercial partner focuses, their marketing metrics might be focused on lead generation, purely in numbers. And it's like, yeah, but if we're giving you key decision makers, you can't, in a conference format, you can't compare the access, the value of that access to the mass of people you might find on a trade show floor, who can be anyone from the student walking by to the visitor who just wanted a pen, etc. You know, if you're getting access to actual decision makers, that's a totally different value. One lead is not equivalent to one lead. That's a really basic example, but it just shows how difficult it can be. And we have to be careful not to kind of just get locked into, well, we can measure this and therefore this is the really important thing, because sometimes the really important stuff is very difficult to measure. So you know, to come to some kind of a conclusion on this, I think we need to be clear where we can see that we can put objective measures on things and do that. And often a lot of commercial agreements, we can do quite a lot of things around that. But there are other areas where we are going to do kind of apples and pears comparisons. And I think I saw quickly one of the questions, I think was from James, about brand integrity. If you don't mind, I'll kind of touch on that now, because in a way, I think this is more, in some cases, it's more a case of people coming and saying, this is what we can bring to the table. And each party saying, I value that, I value that. You can't always say, you know, my people are as important as yours, or I have 1,000 members and you have 100, because maybe the 100 are super important decision makers and the 1,000 are really important to influence the wider community. But you can't get a pure objective equivalence in that. So I think in going into this, we need always to keep that in mind. We can't always kind of neatly balance out all of these type of comparisons.
That's great advice, Colm. Thank you very much for fielding such a tricky question. And I wouldn't be fair as a moderator if I didn't throw the same tricky question at both Judy and David. So Judy, same question to you. How do you and your organization think about what you all bring to the table from an assets, knowledge, and capabilities perspective when you're approaching GIAFs?
Okay, thanks, Tommy. And just touching on something Colm said, because we're a health-related trade association, and an NGO, we come from a different aspect to the others on the panel. And for example, we don't put a dollar value on partnerships because we don't need to. What we look for in partnerships are things like policy influence and influence in general. To us, that's the most important thing, because one of our major aims is to change policy and see self-care embedded in sustainable health systems. So to us, that's the big thing that we look for. And then, of course, shared values as well. And of course, goes without saying, common goals. But for us, and I think we don't think of every partner or alliance. It doesn't always have to be a major alliance. You can have all these different levels of engagement, and it might be just that you have kind of a monitoring partnership, and then we put different levels and our stakeholders on different levels for what we want to do each year. And so it might be monitor, it might be advocate, it might be just consult, have some dialogue, and then for us the highest one is collaborate, and it might be a joint program, a joint meeting at an association event, something like that. So I think we come at it from a different angle, but that's probably why you asked me to be on the panel.
Very true, very true. David, same question to you. How do you approach partnerships to make sure that they're truly fair and balanced? And I think Judy just brought up a very interesting point that I'll ask you to weigh in on as well, which is, how do you define measures of success in a partnership, right? You know, Judy just identified some measures. There's obviously ROI and some other more quantitative measures. How do you make sure your partnerships are fair and balanced, and how do you think about how you measure success in those partnerships?
Yeah, I think it's maybe rather simplistic to say, but I think, you know, partnerships are something ideally that shouldn't be rushed. And where possible, if you do have time to evaluate what you're doing, that's the ideal scenario. I defer to the insight I gave on our RFP process. I think because of this long, some might say drawn out process, but because of this long process, all joking aside, it really allows us to understand the values, as Judy was just saying, of the companies we potentially might be getting into these partnerships with. And it allows us to really delve into all these areas. I think there's so many things across Sibos that we need to look wider at. Sibos is incredibly design-led, an incredibly creative event behind all of the financial goings on. And so we look for a lot of support around that. So the kind of ways we measure ourselves would be, at the moment, would be logistically and creatively, to the point where we would be, you know, putting together workshops to really get a view. Obviously, today is more poignant than most years, but to get a view on where the events industry may be going in 2025, in 2030, to just align on those insights and where these potential partners may be wanting to take us, and if we want to go on that journey together. So there's lots of ways to measure it and to get a feel for where you should be going. On top of all of those obvious partner principles to talk about the complementary capabilities, the trust and fairness, you know, the accessibility, and how we measure the inputs that each partner is having, that SWIFT is having, plus those different partners, those convention bureaus, those suppliers we're working with. You know, it's really important to have those touch points regularly. I think Colm said not to look at a contract, and I fully agree, and I love that analogy. That I think it's a very good point, except maybe to enhance the scope of work each year. But I think that it is important just to have those touch points during the year of a relationship to make sure you're very much on track, not just for the nitty-gritty detail, but strategically as well. So you're still looking ahead at those common goals, and you're still on the right pathway together.
That's excellent. Thank you. Colm, quickly back to you. Thoughts on defining success when it comes to partnerships, alliances, collaborations?
Yeah, I mean, I think success is always quite case specific, but there's, in a way, if you want to open it up, you can really think back to your own association purpose. What constitutes you making a difference to the, you know, to the professional life of a member, or to the mission, if you're a more mission-driven, purpose-driven organization. You know, where in a way, understanding where you think your value proposition sits, and then being very clear on what this partnership might do to support that. And you know, there's so many different kind of measures and ways to look at this that I think it's quite difficult to nail it down. But you know, I do think it comes back to understanding whether the partnership is there for a, let's say, a strategic intent, a mission intent, like Judy was talking about, really things like influence and policy influence, you know, very, very strategic level. And then on the other hand, you have partnerships that may seem much more basic, but you know, things that improve an operational process that saves the organization money, that then allows it to reinvest in more mission-driven activities. They're all part of the helping the association to move forward. So it's kind of back to my original point about keeping an open mind about what partnerships and collaborations, et cetera, might be, and then just trying to be really clear on the value that each party is bringing into that collaboration.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. Judy, we have a question from the wonderful Jane Cunningham, who asks, kind of based on your comments there previously, do you view conferences as a vehicle that allows you to get closer to your goals when it comes to changing policy, creating partnerships by engaging with the community where the conference is held? Do you all view it from that perspective?
I would say in this life, in this role, not as much, but in previous roles, when I was CEO of the International Osteoporosis Foundation, we very much regarded conferences as that sort of vehicle, that it wasn't just networking and having other meetings. It was about how can we move the needle, how can we how can we change policy? I mean, I would say to a certain extent our meetings now do that, but yeah, it's kind of a different scenario, but certainly there is a role for conferences and in-person meetings to be able to do that. I fully agree with that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And for those of you who have conferences who are deeply engaged in that combination of sort of, engagement and legacy, highly recommend the Best Cities Global Alliance and ICA Incredible Impacts Program. I'll drop a link in there in the chat. And for those of you who are engaged in that, I would highly recommend extend you the opportunity to apply for one of their $7,500 US grants that's coming up. So a wonderful program from the Best Cities and ICA folks. All right, quick stoppage time question for everyone, and then we're going to turn to questions from our wonderful folks who are with us today. This is a question about some of the more unique and exotic partnerships that can be developed, sort of the strange bedfellows alliances where, sometimes you see these partnerships evolve in the association community that, involve a couple of organizations that perhaps you wouldn't expect, or, sometimes it's even competitors joining forces in unique ways. And sometimes these can be fairly successful. I think we've seen recently an alliance of large football clubs that proves they're not always successful. But Judy, as starting with you, as you think about how does your organization think about these sort of outside the box partnerships? And have you all had experience in that realm?
Yeah, I have, and I've certainly had experience with competitors and people trying to maybe encroach on your space. And I think with, again, health and medical related NGOs, there are always competitors, too many competitors. And I always use the example of breast cancer associations in nearly every country in the world. There are too many of them and all fighting for the same alliances, government attention, attention from policymakers, and of course, sponsorship and money. So I think competition is good, but sometimes there's just way too much competition. But from our point of view and my point of view right now, yeah, there are probably one or two competitors. And I think what I always try and do is bring those competitors in if possible. Okay, someone thinks they're a competitor, but can we work together? Can we bring them in? Can you bring them onto your board or committees or something like that? So that old expression, keep your not enemies, but keep your competitors close. And I think that's one strategy that we always think of in terms of that.
Yeah, that's great. David, thoughts from you on these sort of non-traditional partnerships, opportunities, threats, something in between?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And, I'd maybe start by asking, is your event, is your association a success today? And are new partnerships really needed? Obviously we're here today to talk and promote potentially new partnerships, but we shouldn't be simply partnering for the sake of partnering as well. I think it needs to, enhance the experience for the end user, and it shouldn't just be viewed as bolstering the coffers, for example. So I think that's really important. It needs to serve an industry need. For example, SWIFT via Sibos facilitates industry dialogue and senior level industry networking for the financial community, for example. So I think taking the partnership road, it's difficult to turn back to what it was before. So I think there is a bit of a brand consideration about who you partner with and what that might look like tomorrow. I think that is important. And to your point, Tommy, on the football Super League saga, I think it's a wonderful example, isn't it, of how high-powered individuals have really not taken the time, and all of the components we've spoken about early on that go into making successful partnerships, they haven't taken any time to understand what the football community really wants. And in the football community, it is all about making football available and accessible to all, whereas it's clear that these individuals just had one vision in mind. I have to say, it is unusual to see partnerships being announced and fall apart 24 to 48 hours later. So I do think it is really important, I think, to do your research when considering partnership options as well, before going on that journey. Yeah.
Okay, very fair point about the very quick nature of that partnership. Colm, the final word on these non-traditional partnerships. It's your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on several of the points earlier. You know, I did say keep an open mind. So there are lots of things that can add value or help you to run your business better. So I think people should be open to that. I think the reputational question is a really interesting one, or the reputational angle. So you do need to think about what people how people will perceive that, because you know it may not be apparent. And the other way of looking at it, of course, is that there may be partnerships that your staff team can run that are in a way not really public knowledge, might be very valuable to the organization, but you know your members don't necessarily if they trust the staff team to run the operations. If you've developed a new partnership that makes those operations smoother by using a new technology or outsourcing some parts of the process, etc., those are partnerships that can be extremely valuable, but then you don't really need to publicize. So I think that's just another aspect when you're maybe thinking of some of the things that may fall outside the realm of what we would think about as partnerships and alliances in the traditional sense. Also remember that not all these partnerships, especially the ones that are business driven or operations driven, they aren't necessarily things that you need to issue a press release about. So those can be kept more internal, because and people don't need to necessarily know all the details, except that things are going to be smoother or they're going to get a better service. So hopefully that adds something into the mix. And we can talk all day about the Super League, but we've already had that conversation, Tommy. So you know where we stand. But it is, I think it was Jan posted. I mean, this is going to be a case study for the. So my last thought on that is, where were the PR guys that wrote the apology statements? Where were they 3 days before they actually wrote the announcement that we're going to do this? Because it surely can't be the same PR consultant that did the two announcements.
All right, so for those of you with us, the panel has a unified point of view on the Super League. I want to quickly turn to a couple of questions that came in from folks with us today. And one was from James Lancaster, and he asked, do folks have any advice about ensuring a brand hierarchy doesn't develop when partnering with another association? Is it important that associations have a similar stature in terms of time, resources, et cetera, so that they're equal partners, or is that not necessarily required? And I will throw that open to anyone who has a point of view there.
Well, I'll jump in. From my point of view, I don't think it matters if they don't, another association or someone you're partnering with has the same amount of resources, etc. I don't think that matters at all, because they might bring other things to the table that you want. I mean, as equal as you can get the partnership, the better, in terms of what you put into it. But I think everyone brings something to the table, and if you're obviously considering this a partnership, then there are things that organization brings. So I don't think it matters if everyone's equal in terms of resources and funding and that sort of thing, from my point of view.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mentioned this a bit earlier. I mean, I in a way, I don't know that it's realistic to expect to have equality, because there's so many variables in the mix. So, if you would have a very, very short list of potential partners, if that's what you were seeking. So I do think if we look at this from a, diversity brings strength, whether it's, perspectives or different resources or different skills, then you're naturally going to get mismatches. Like I said earlier, measuring success, what should count is that each party respects that the other one is bringing value to the table, because a lot of this will be extremely hard to quantify, like in an objective way, and match those values.
Great thoughts there. David.
No, I was just going to agree. I think at Sibos, we're all very much rowing in the same direction when it comes to the brand. But I think what we do work on quite heavily is to make sure that whoever we introduce into the partner ecosystem to work on the event, we really make sure that there is a clear alignment on, you know, how everything is knit together, so that there isn't, you know, any land grab opportunities, and that those partnerships can coexist and drive the success of the event on as well. So yeah, that's an important aspect for us in terms of how we make sure that brand keeps on growing and staying strong.
Thank you for that. Another question, from a starting point of developing partnerships, would each of you recommend jumping in with a particular partnership experiment, or is it best to approach it slowly by doing, I think in some ways, what Judy has just done, which is developing a strategy before exploring new partnerships? How do folks feel that? Is it more of a test and learn and iterative process, or is this something that needs a firm strategy initially?
Okay, well, I'll jump in again. I think look, we've taken the time to develop a strategy, but of course we have existing partners and alliances, and you know, we've obviously continued to work on that, you know, and build on that. But the other thing I would say, and I think it came up before, is don't miss out on opportunities. And sometimes it's that person you sit next to at a meeting or an event or at a cocktail party or something like that, where you know, a partnership grows. So I think, you know, it's good to have plans, but always seize those opportunities.
I think yeah, I think one of the things that we've started to do on our side, you know, you can have people, I revert back to the RFPs, but you can have lots of paper and people can tell you lots and lots of things that they're going to do for you in a partnership, but that doesn't always translate. And I think some of the success we have had over the last number of years is trying to really get into kind of workshop style sessions. So before entering into a partnership, trying to realize you know, creativity workshops. So instead of reading that someone is incredibly creative and these are all the events they've done, let's delve into it and let's have a workshop and show us tangibly what you're going to do for us. And I think there's many ways which you can expand on that and look at doing these things to really dive much deeper on what that partnership could be, to give yourself that more insight to help you make an informed decision ultimately. So I think we've started to do that over the years, and it's really incredibly helpful, that deep diving creatively, but much wider as well. You can really scale that up across many facets. Yeah.
I think what Judy mentioned there about not missing opportunities, that really kind of clicked with me, because in a way, process is very important, and you shouldn't go into big things without it following the appropriate process and like I said, thinking about the consequences and so on. On the other hand, you should also have values and principles that you can rely on when you need to move faster, because there will be world events that happen where you can't sit down and run a month-long discussion process before you come out the other side and then say, yes, we should do this. Okay, well, it's now 3 weeks past the time we should have done it, and it has no value anymore. So I think you gotta have, and I hope if there's one big positive thing for the association world to come to gain from the whole COVID crisis, it is just greater agility and maybe more trust developed between staff and boards, or better kind of division of authorities, that people can make decisions within the timeframes that they need to be made. And some things will come and go too fast, but you know, I do think you need to keep an open mind, like I said, and evaluate things. You can't evaluate yes, we should respond to this with a statement. You can't evaluate that in the same way as let's collaborate on a large in-person event in 2 years' time from now. Clearly, they don't require the same kind of process to work through.
I appreciate that. And I think your advice earlier around looking for new opportunities in this digital environment and finding new ways to partner that may have been impossible previously, I think is very well taken, Colm. Thank you. And friends, I think we have it there. We thank everyone for the wonderful questions, as well as the comments and the ideas and the best practices that you all shared throughout. We appreciate the engagement and dialogue during today's session. And so as our time draws to a close, I want to thank again our wonderful panelists, Judy Stenmark from the Global Self-Care Foundation, Colm Clarke from Exempla Management and Consulting, and David Bridgeman from Swift and Sibos. Of course, thanks to Ann Seberg and the entire GIAF team for all of their hard work in designing and delivering this session for everyone today. And last but not least, a special thank you again to all of the Geneva International Association Forum supporting partners, Barcelona Convention Bureau. I know several folks are here from there today. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you for your support. The Singapore Exhibition and Convention Bureau, the Geneva Convention Bureau. I know we've got lots of folks from Geneva here with us today. Delighted to see all of you. The Intercontinental Geneva, and of course, Congrex Switzerland. And last but not least, thanks to all of you for spending time with us in conversation today. As you know, this is the fifth GIAF webinar, and the next virtual session we're happy to announce is being planned for Tuesday, the 22nd of June, and it will be the future of association buyers and suppliers. Alone we can do little, together we can do much, which is certainly very true. So we hope to see you all again on June 22nd for that engaging dialogue. And then, of course, all of these wonderful sessions are leading up and will culminate with GIAF, the Geneva International Association Forum, which is slated to take place on September 16 and 17. And it will be wonderful for this community to meet again in person in September in Geneva. So please make plans to join us for what promises to be a remarkable couple of days together in Geneva in September. So with that being said, we look forward to seeing all of you for the session on June 22 on the future of association buyers and suppliers. And until then, thank you again for joining us. Stay safe, take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.